Hi everyone, it's Angela, and I wanted to make a quick video that helps to explain a little bit about the context behind the Claimmaker's Toolkit, as well as how you might approach different activities that are on the pages that follow, and how you might use the document as a whole. This was created, the intention was for middle school and high school teachers to be able to adapt the content that you find here in a way that's useful to you, although I do think that there are some elementary teachers and also college instructors who might find this useful. You'll notice that it does have Creative Commons licensing, and you are welcome to use, adapt, and share this in whatever way you wish, as long as you just give me credit. The first page walks you through what this document contains, and I really tried to design this in a way that allows learners to develop an understanding of what multimodal composition is and to acquire some language for it before they have the opportunity to think about rhetorical analysis, looking at multimodal compositions and analyzing them in that particular way, and then putting a critical eye on how different forms are created. Some researchers use the term genre and form interchangeably. In my work, I try to keep the word genre a little bit separate from form, only because my audience is usually English language arts and English and writing teachers, and when we use the word genre, we tend to think of common genres inside of our niche or field, like narrative genres that come in the form of stories. When we think about informational text, and we think about perhaps research papers and reports, or we think about arguments and claims and perhaps letters to the editor, things like that. And so I use the word form because it's distinct to multimodal composition, and I think it honors the sort of messy nature of describing genres too. Genres are constantly shifting and changing in response to what's possible and what people are interested in and what captivates people's interest. So you'll find some tools here that will help learners explore different forms as well, and consider the modalities as well as the design choices that creators are making before they have the opportunity to try some of these things in their own writing. I talk about prototyping a little bit here. I'll be talking about it more in newsletters and in videos, and even maybe some coffee hours that follow. And I'm giving some guidance around how writers might create a pitch for a prototype that they develop. I don't actually get into the writing or composing process beyond that point here, and I want to make sure that I'm leaving a lot of opportunity and choice for you to implement these activities in a way that makes sense to you. If you do use this work, I hope you'll reach out to me and give me some feedback about how to make it better as well. I literally riffed off of this unit that I taught pre-COVID in a high school. I sort of made it a little bit more relevant to the times that we're all experiencing right now. And I put a lot more down on paper than I typically do when I'm teaching something live, starting with this description of what multimodal composition is. This is good language for learners and teachers to develop, and the definitions of the most basic terms around multimodality, you'll find them on page 3. On page 4, I begin to create a more relevant context for multimodality for students, and I challenge them to think about the multimodal compositions that mean the most to them before they move on to page 5, and the opportunity to really document different kinds of multimodal compositions that they come across in a given day. And these things might be less meaningful to them, and what I really want them to notice here are ordinary things, so that they can see the role that multimodal compositions play in our day-to-day life. As they come to the content that you see on page 6, they can begin a rhetorical analysis of multimodal claims. This is a simple way to ease into the work, and you'll notice an example on page 7 of my efforts here. I took 3 different multimodal compositions, and I tried to create a one-page snapshot of how I was completing a rhetorical analysis across all three of them, and I wanted them to be side by side so that students could see this easily. The claim that's made is a common one across all of these compositions, but the way that the creators are approaching it is very different. The modes that they choose, the design choices they make, the context for how the work comes to life, where it's shared, who it's shared with, the other things that exist around it, the audience, all of these things are very different. I put them on the same page because I want students to see how a rhetorical analysis can be made on three different compositions that tend to align to a similar claim. You may not want to use my example or the different pieces that I was analyzing, and that's perfectly fine as well. You might just use this to inspire your own work and how you might go about modeling rhetorical analysis and acquainting writers with it. The sheets that follow, three of them, I wanted to give writers more space, so they're encouraged to do similar work, but I've given them a little bit more room to do that by spreading their documentation tool out over 3 pages. Once this is complete, I invite them to seek conventionality next by looking across different forms of arguments. And because I'm not acquainted with the writers that you serve, and I'm uncertain if they are able to really tease out what is conventional about most claims that are made regardless of the form that they might come in, I've defined some of those conventions here. Most claims also are supported by evidence and a call to action. I want them to notice the unique strengths and limitations of each of the different compositions that they're taking a peek at. I give examples of that on page 12. And then again, I give them more room on the 3 pages that follow for them to complete the same work inside of the multimodal compositions that they found. Hopefully, this investigation and this sort of scaffolded inquiry approach, where they're really taking a peek at other examples and choosing their own, it will help them arrive at a claim that they might want to make and a form that they might choose to experiment with. And you might need, I assume that you will, extra lessons of your own to help them choose those topics and to help them decide what form their own multimodal composition might take. Once they've selected that form, I'm inviting them on page 16 to make a study of the specific conventions that align to that distinct form. I model this with infographics and give them some space to come up with their own analysis as well. And then on page 17, we begin the work of prototyping. When we are creating multimodal claims, some of them are very dynamic. Users engage with them, they interact with them. I'm thinking of web pages and apps and even spoken word performances that involve audience interaction. There are all sorts of dynamic multimodal compositions that require us to think about more than what will be created and when and where, but also how users or an audience will engage with it. Vision boarding is useful for this kind of planning, and I've shared some examples of vision boards to the left of this document with all of you. On the right-hand side, you'll see examples of storyboards. Storyboards are often used with more static and linear types of composition. When we think of things like comic books, for instance, or stories that we might write using written words. You'll also see an example of how one writer began experimenting with different musical selections and how the music was influencing the way that a character was sort of aligned to the way that a character was behaving and acting throughout a story. So if you look in the upper right-hand side of this document, you'll notice some lines that are written on lined paper. That's really a student experimenting with music and how it shapes a story. Once students have learned conventions and investigated conventions that are common to a form, they're invited to look at the prototype they've created and change just one thing about it in order to tinker with it and make it even better. then they have to consider how that influences all of the other elements inside of that composition and whether or not it's feasible and meaningful to keep them. There is an opportunity for them to learn how to create a pitch, and this is usually composed with written words, although you may choose to have them do this differently and use different modes of expression to share it. And then I've shared some recommended reading and references in my resources that I relied on most heavily for this work on the last page. I'm excited to see what you do with all of this, how you might change it and make it better. One last point that I will make is, while this is a static document, my intention was to share it with you that way so that you have the opportunity to see efficiently the intention behind the design and the way that I'm moving students through this mini unit on claim making. All of these different resources and tools might be something that you share with students live, and you might engage them in work that is much more interactive and that relies on other modes of expression for them to share their thinking and their progress as they move through it. If you want to know more and you have questions, I hope that you'll reach out to me. My name is Angela Stockman. Again, you can find me at StockmanAngela, all one word, at gmail.com. And I go by the same handle at Angela Stockman on Twitter as well. I hope that this is useful to all of you, and I'm looking forward to hearing more. Thanks, everyone.